On the morning of the 14th of October 1988, the woman known to her neighbors in the Pangrati district of Athens as Katarina Ianu began her day as she always did, with a meticulous routine that was itself a work of artifice, a carefully constructed performance for an audience that might never materialize, but whose potential presence dictated every gesture. She ground her coffee beans by hand, the specific blend sourced from a small shop in Plaka, its aroma a calculated detail in the olfactory landscape of her cover identity as a visiting art student from Berlin. Her small apartment, overlooking the dense urban tapestry of the city, was filled not with the sterile emptiness of a temporary lodging, but with the curated clutter of a life in progress. Canvases in various stages of completion leaned against the walls, their subjects the angular shadows and sun-bleached facades of Athens, while charcoal sketches were pinned above a simple wooden desk, each one a study in light and form. To any observer, she was the embodiment of a creative soul immersed in her craft, her days governed by the pursuit of aesthetic truth. This perception was the primary layer of a legend so deeply fabricated that its falsehood had become her functional reality, a truth she inhabited with the same unconscious ease with which she breathed the city's air, thick with exhaust and the scent of jasmine. Yet, the sketches were not merely artistic exercises, they were sophisticated surveillance logs, where the placement of a street vendor's cart noted the position of a counter-surveillance operative. The number of pigeons on a specific windowsill was a coded signal confirming a dead drop had been cleared, and the subtle variations in the depiction of a particular cafe's awning chronicled the sporadic but predictable appearances of her target. Katarina Ianu did not exist. She was a shell, a meticulously crafted vessel for an operative of the Mossad's Kidon unit, and her true purpose in Athens had nothing to do with art and everything to do with the methodical, patient, and clinical dismantling of a terrorist network by eliminating its central, irreplaceable node. The problem confronting the Israeli intelligence community was not one of violence, but of logistics, a far more insidious and resilient challenge that conventional military and intelligence methods had proven incapable of solving. The target was not a bombastic leader or a fanatical foot soldier, but a man named Hamid al-Jabari, a figure who operated entirely in the shadows, a logistical and financial virtuoso for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. Al-Jabari was what intelligence analysts termed a superfixer, an individual whose unique combination of organizational genius, technological savvy, and profound paranoia enabled the seamless flow of weapons, funds, and operatives from the Middle East into the heart of Europe. He built and maintained the invisible infrastructure of terror, the network of safe houses, the chains of money launderers who could move vast sums through legitimate businesses, the forgers who produced travel documents of such high quality they were indistinguishable from the genuine article, and the encrypted communication channels that allowed disparate cells to coordinate their actions without revealing their structure. For years, attempts to disrupt his network had failed because they targeted the symptoms rather than the cause. A weapons cache might be seized in Brussels or a cell rounded up in Rome, but within months, the network would regenerate, its severed limbs regrown with terrifying speed, because al-Jabari, the brain, remained untouched and untouchable. He practiced an almost inhuman level of operational security, never using the same communication method twice in a cycle, never meeting contacts in person, and maintaining a life of such profound public normalcy that he was functionally invisible. Previous efforts to place him under surveillance had ended in failure. His counter-surveillance drills were masterful, involving hours-long, seemingly random journeys through urban landscapes that were designed to expose any follow team, no matter how sophisticated. The strategic assessment was stark. As long as Hamid al-Jabari was operational, the PFLP-GC's capacity for lethal action in Europe was infinite. The only solution was a surgical one, but surgery required proximity, and proximity to al-Jabari was considered an operational impossibility. A comprehensive psychological and operational profile of Hamid al-Jabari was assembled over a period of 2 years, a mosaic built from 1,000 tiny, disparate fragments of intelligence gathered from signals intercepts, defector debriefings, and the forensic analysis of failed terrorist plots. Born in Kuwait to a family of displaced Palestinian academics, he had excelled in his youth, eventually earning a degree in systems engineering from a university in Cairo. a field that perfectly suited his methodical and logical mind. He was not a man driven by overt religious fanaticism or fiery political rhetoric. His radicalization was an intellectual process, a cold equation in which he had concluded that the asymmetric application of terror was the only logical recourse for his people. This clinical detachment was his greatest strength. He viewed his work not as a holy war, but as a complex logistical problem to be solved with maximum efficiency. His operational signature was one of meticulous planning and an obsession with redundancy. Every safe house had multiple escape routes, every financial transaction had layers of cutouts, and every operative had a primary, secondary, and tertiary communication plan. He resided in Athens under a plausible, legally obtained identity as a mid-level import-export consultant, a profession that provided a perfect cover for his constant travel and his dealings with a wide array of international contacts. Physically, he was unremarkable, a man in his late 40s of medium height and build who dressed conservatively and projected an aura of quiet professionalism. His vulnerability, the intelligence analysts concluded after painstaking analysis, was not a vice like greed or lust, but a subtle intellectual arrogance. He frequented a specific type of old-world European café, not for the coffee, but for the atmosphere of quiet intellectualism, a space where he could read international newspapers and observe the flow of life without engagement. He believed his pattern of visiting several such cafes on a rotating, irregular schedule made him unpredictable. But long-term analysis revealed a meta-pattern, a subtle statistical preference for a particular establishment in the Pangrati district, especially on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. It was a minuscule crack in an otherwise flawless facade of security, a fractional error born of habit and comfort, and it was through this crack that the Mossad intended to insert its scalpel. The solution proposed by the head of the Caesarea department was audacious and carried a risk of catastrophic failure that made many within the intelligence directorate deeply uneasy. The plan was codenamed Operation Hyacinth, and it rejected all conventional methods of assassination, such as car bombs or long-range sniper fire, which were deemed too loud, too messy, and too likely to result in collateral damage and diplomatic fallout with the Greek government. Instead, the proposal called for an operation of unparalleled subtlety, a close-access social penetration mission, culminating in a neutralization that would appear to be death by natural causes. The core concept was to insert a deep-cover female operative into the target's environment months in advance, not to make direct contact, but to become a piece of the local scenery, a familiar background figure whose presence would eventually be registered by al-Jabari's paranoid subconscious as benign. This operative would have to construct and live a legend of such flawless detail that it could withstand not only casual scrutiny, but potentially active counterintelligence investigation. The final act would involve the use of a highly specialized, non-ballistic weapon system to deliver a biological agent that would induce a medical crisis, such as a heart attack or a cerebral hemorrhage, that would be indistinguishable from a natural event during an autopsy, especially a perfunctory one. The obstacles were formidable. The operative would be required to live in complete isolation for up to a year, with no direct contact with a handler, relying solely on dead drops and coded signals for communication. The linguistic and cultural barriers were significant. She would need to be flawlessly fluent in both modern Greek and the specific German accent and idioms appropriate for her cover as a student from Berlin. The technical challenge of developing a reliable toxin and a silent, concealable delivery mechanism was immense. Furthermore, the risk of exposure was constant. A single mistake, a misplaced word, an anachronistic detail in her backstory could unravel the entire operation, leading to her capture, torture, and the complete disavowal by the Israeli state. The consequences of failure extended beyond the loss of the agent. It would expose the Mossad's methods, create a severe diplomatic crisis with a notionally friendly European nation, and likely result in al-Jabari going even deeper underground, making him forever untouchable. The selection process for the operative was ruthlessly specific, seeking a unique confluence of psychological resilience, intellectual capacity, and physical aptitude. They found their candidate in a 27-year-old woman serving as a data analyst in a military intelligence unit, a soldier who, for the purposes of this history, will be referred to as Aviva. Her official file noted her exceptional linguistic abilities. She was fluent in Hebrew, English, and German, and had a remarkable aptitude for acquiring new languages and her background in fine arts before her military service. But it was the psychological profile that made her stand out. Assessments revealed an individual with an extraordinary capacity for compartmentalization, the ability to emotionally wall off different aspects of her life and operate with clinical detachment under immense pressure. Her motivation was not simple patriotism. It was a colder, harder thing, forged in the crucible of personal tragedy. Her younger brother had been killed years earlier in a bus bombing in Jerusalem, an attack for which the PFLP-GC had claimed responsibility. Her grief had not manifested as outward rage, but had instead sublimated into a quiet, focused, and utterly implacable resolve. She did not seek vengeance in a hot-blooded sense. She sought a rebalancing of the scales, a precise and logical nullification of the forces that had brought chaos to her world. Her handlers understood that this core motivation made her exceptionally suited for the profound isolation and moral ambiguity of the mission. Her training regimen was grueling and comprehensive, designed to strip away Aviva and build Katarina from the ground up. She spent 6 months in intensive language training, not just learning Greek but perfecting the accent, slang, and cultural nuances of a native Athenian. A further 3 months were spent with a professional artist, not to become a master, but to learn the habits, the techniques, and the very way of seeing the world that would make her portrayal of an art student utterly convincing. She learned how to mix paints, how to stretch a canvas, how to hold a piece of charcoal, and how to critique a piece of art using the correct terminology. Concurrently, she underwent extensive training in the tradecraft of deep cover operations, detecting and evading surveillance, using dead drops, microphotography, creating and maintaining a secure communications schedule, and the subtle art of social engineering, eliciting information without asking direct questions. Finally, she was drilled relentlessly in the specific actions of the mission's climax, the handling of the concealed delivery device, the precise movements required for its deployment in a crowded public space, and the immediate post-action protocol for exfiltration. She was being transformed, piece by piece, from an analyst into a weapon, her entire being reshaped and calibrated for a single, fleeting moment in a cafe in Athens. The construction of the cover identity, the legend of Katarina Ianu, was an exercise in obsessive detail, a project undertaken by an entire team within the Mossad's operational support division. The goal was to create a backstory so robust and layered that it would appear authentic from every possible angle of investigation. The foundation was a set of forged but officially backstopped documents, a birth certificate indicating she was born in Tel Aviv to a Greek Jewish mother and an Israeli father, an Israeli passport showing extensive travel, and a German residency permit. The team then built her academic history, creating a digital and physical paper trail at the Berlin University of the Arts. They enrolled her in past classes, generated transcripts with plausible grades, and even submitted pieces of artwork created by the same artist who had trained Aviva to student exhibitions under Katarina's name, ensuring her name would appear in archived catalogs. A financial history was established through a German bank, with an account opened 2 years prior to the operation's start. This account was used for regular, mundane transactions, rent payments for a fictitious Berlin apartment, grocery bills, art supply purchases, and monthly deposits from a family trust fund, providing a legitimate source of income. Her digital footprint was meticulously curated. Social media profiles were created on multiple platforms, backdated over 2 years. These profiles painted a picture of a typical, slightly bohemian art student. Photos from galleries in Berlin, posts about artistic theory, casual check-ins at cafes, and connections to a network of real, unwitting individuals in the Berlin art scene who had been casually cultivated by other Mossad assets. The final layer of the legend was physical. A complete wardrobe was assembled, reflecting a specific, slightly eclectic European style. She was given props that reinforced her identity. Well-worn art history textbooks with margin notes, a specific brand of German cigarettes she would smoke occasionally, and a collection of letters from her mother in Tel Aviv, written by another operative, filled with the mundane details of family life. The selection of her apartment in Pangrati was itself a strategic decision. It was in a building with a mix of transient students and elderly residents, a place where a new, quiet neighbor would not attract undue attention. Every element, from the books on her shelf to the brand of tea in her cupboard, was chosen to be a silent, constant affirmation of the lie she was tasked to live. The technological centerpiece of Operation Hyacinth was the weapon, a device that existed at the intersection of pharmacology, microengineering, and clandestine tradecraft. The project was assigned to a specialized unit within the Mossad's technical division, which spent over a year developing and perfecting the system. The core problem was the requirement for absolute deniability. The solution was twofold: a sophisticated biological agent and a novel delivery mechanism. The agent was a highly concentrated derivative of a potent cardiac glycoside, a chemical that, when introduced into the bloodstream, would interfere with the heart's electrical conductivity. The technical team synthesized a specific isomer that was engineered to be metabolized and broken down by the body with extreme rapidity, leaving behind no identifiable chemical traces that a standard toxicological screen would detect. The effect on the target would be a massive, fulminant heart attack, a catastrophic cardiac event that would be clinically indistinguishable from a natural coronary thrombosis, especially in a man of Al-Jabari's age and sedentary lifestyle. The delivery mechanism was equally ingenious. It was not a gun in any conventional sense. The device was a self-contained, single-use gas pressure injector, no larger than a standard fountain pen. Its internal components were crafted from composite materials that would not register on a metal detector. The projectile was not a bullet, but a tiny, ice-like flechette, measuring just 1.1 millimeters in diameter, composed of the frozen biological agent mixed with a sucrose binder for stability. Upon activation, a silent release of compressed CO2 would propel the flechette with enough force to penetrate clothing and skin, where it would instantly dissolve into the bloodstream, leaving a puncture wound so small it would be mistaken for an insect bite or skin blemish, if it were noticed at all. Aviva was trained to use the device in a specific manner, a method called a brush-pass contact, where she would walk past the target and, in a fluid, seemingly accidental motion, press the tip of the pen against his thigh or lower back. The injection was instantaneous and virtually painless. The entire system was designed for a single moment of use, after which the device could be easily disposed of, leaving behind no evidence to connect the agent to the target's sudden demise. The supporting technology for the mission included a suite of surveillance and communication tools embedded in Aviva's apartment, all designed to be passive and undetectable. A series of microscopic, fiber-optic cameras were installed behind wall fixtures, providing her support team with a constant view of her living space, allowing them to monitor her psychological state and ensure the integrity of her cover. Her communications with her handler were conducted via a burst transmission device disguised as a digital alarm clock, which could send and receive encrypted text packages in a fraction of a second, making them nearly impossible to intercept. Aviva's insertion into Athens under the guise of Katarina Ianu occurred in late August of 1988, a time chosen to coincide with the influx of international students for the fall semester, allowing her arrival to blend seamlessly with the city's natural rhythm. She flew in from Berlin on a commercial flight, passed through immigration without issue, and took a taxi to the pre-leased apartment in Pangrati. Her initial weeks were a period of deliberate and methodical acclimatization, a slow, patient process of weaving her fabricated identity into the fabric of the city. She did not rush. She enrolled in a life drawing class at a local art studio, a legitimate course where her attendance was recorded and her presence noted by fellow students and instructors. She established a daily routine, mornings spent sketching in public squares or parks, afternoons at the studio, and evenings reading at home or occasionally visiting a local cinema. She found a preferred bakery, a specific vendor at the weekly farmers market, and a quiet bookstore where the owner came to recognize her. Each of these small, repeated actions was a thread in the tapestry of her legend, creating a pattern of normalcy that would be observed by neighbors and shopkeepers. She was careful to project the right persona: quiet, studious, slightly introverted, a young woman absorbed in her world of art, friendly but not overly familiar. She never initiated conversations with strangers but would respond politely if spoken to. This behavior was calculated to make her unremarkable, a person who could occupy a space without drawing focus. During this entire period, she made no attempt to locate or observe Hamid al-Jabari. Her instructions were explicit. Her sole focus was to become Katarina, to live and breathe the identity until it was second nature. Her support team handled all active surveillance of the target, and her only connection to the wider operation was a weekly dead drop where she would exchange a memory card hidden inside a hollowed-out charcoal stick for a new one containing updates and instructions. The psychological pressure of this phase was immense. It was a period of profound isolation, a state of being constantly on guard, where every word and every action had to be filtered through the prism of her cover. After 3 months of successfully embedding her cover identity, the operation transitioned into its second, more tense phase. Aviva was instructed to subtly shift her routine to incorporate the specific cafe that the surveillance team had identified as Al-Jabari's preferred location. The integration had to be natural, a believable evolution of her established habits. She began visiting the cafe, named the Byzantion, once a week, always on a Monday, a day when intelligence indicated Al-Jabari was least likely to be there. She would order a Greek coffee and a pastry, sit at a small corner table for precisely 1 hour, and sketch in her notebook. She never spoke to the staff beyond ordering and paying, and she never looked around the room with any obvious interest. Her purpose was to become a fixture, another one of the cafe's quiet regulars. After a month, she increased her visits to twice a week, adding a Friday afternoon to her schedule. The surveillance team, monitoring from a van parked 2 blocks away and through a technical asset with a view of the cafe's entrance, confirmed that Al-Jabari had not been present during any of her visits. The tension began to build, a slow, grinding anticipation that wore on Aviva's nerves. Living the lie was one thing. Living it in proximity to the impending climax of the mission was another. Her communications with her handler, delivered via the encrypted burst transmissions, focused on psychological reinforcement, reminding her to trust the plan and maintain her discipline. In mid-October, the signal came. A coded phrase embedded in a public radio broadcast, followed by a confirmation in her next dead drop, informed her that the window of opportunity was opening. Long-range surveillance indicated that Al-Jabari was scheduled to meet a financial courier from Lebanon in the coming days, and it was assessed that he would use the Byzantion for a final, brief visual confirmation of the courier before the actual exchange of funds took place elsewhere. The operational tempo quickened. Aviva was instructed to be at the cafe on the morning of Tuesday, October 14th, from 10 a.m. onwards. The delivery device, the pen, was retrieved from its hiding place, a secret compartment carved into the spine of an art history textbook. The final instructions were simple. Wait for the primary go signal, the waiter dropping a spoon, and act. If the signal was not given by noon, she was to pay for her coffee and leave, and the operation would be scrubbed for another day. The wait was the hardest part, a period of suspended animation where months of preparation, training, and psychological endurance would converge on a single, irrevocable moment. On the morning of the operation, Aviva walked to the Byzantion cafe, the cool weight of the disguised injection device in her coat pocket, a tangible reminder of her purpose. She entered at 10:15 a.m., the small bell above the door announcing her arrival with a gentle chime. The cafe was moderately busy, filled with the murmur of conversation and the clatter of ceramic on saucers. She took her usual corner table, which offered a clear but discreet view of the entrance and the main seating area. She ordered her coffee, opened her sketchbook, and began to draw, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Her senses were heightened to an almost painful degree. She was aware of every conversation, every footstep, every shift in the ambient light. At 10:47 a.m., Hamid Al-Jabari entered the cafe. He looked exactly as he had in the hundreds of surveillance photos she had studied. Nondescript, methodical, his eyes scanning the room in a practiced, almost imperceptible sweep before he selected a table near the window. He ordered an espresso and opened a copy of Le Monde, creating a small wall of privacy around himself. For the next 30 minutes, nothing happened. The two of them existed in the same space, a killer and her target, separated by a few meters of tiled floor and a universe of secrets. Aviva continued to sketch, her charcoal moving across the paper in controlled, deliberate strokes, her outward demeanor a perfect portrait of calm artistic focus. At 11:18 a.m., a young man with a backpack entered the cafe, ordered a coffee to go, and stood near the counter. The surveillance team identified him as the courier. Al-Jabari subtly lowered his newspaper, his eyes meeting the courier's for a fraction of a second in a silent acknowledgement. A moment later, a waiter passing Al-Jabari's table stumbled slightly, and a silver spoon slipped from his tray, clattering onto the floor. It was the signal. Aviva closed her sketchbook. She placed a few coins on the table for her coffee, stood up, and put on her coat. Her path to the exit would take her directly behind Al-Jabari's chair. She began to walk, her pace normal, unhurried. As she drew level with him, she feigned a slight stumble, her right hand, holding the pen, brushing against his lower back as she reached out to steady herself against his chair. The tip of the device made contact with his woolen jacket for less than a second. The silent discharge of compressed gas was imperceptible amidst the cafe's ambient noise. She murmured a quiet apology in Greek, which he acknowledged with a grunt, never taking his eyes off his newspaper. She continued to the door and stepped out into the bright Athens sunlight. Aviva did not look back. Her post-action protocol was drilled into her with the precision of a choreographed dance. She walked at a steady pace for 3 blocks, turning right onto a busy commercial street, blending into the pedestrian traffic. She entered a large department store, a pre-scouted location with multiple entrances and exits. Inside, she went into a restroom, where she spent 7 minutes changing her appearance. She removed the dark wig she wore as Katarina, revealing her own shorter, lighter hair. She exchanged her artist's coat and jeans for a conservative business-style skirt and blouse that she had carried in her shoulder bag. She put on a pair of non-prescription glasses and applied a different shade of lipstick. When she emerged, Katarina Ianu had effectively ceased to exist. She exited the department store through a different door, onto a different street. She walked another 4 blocks to a prearranged spot, where she dropped the empty shoulder bag, containing the wig and old clothes, into a municipal rubbish bin. The injection device, now a useless piece of composite plastic, was dropped into a different bin several streets further on. Her movements were designed to systematically sever any link between her new appearance and the woman who had just left the Byzantine cafe. She then took a city bus, a route she had memorized, to a neighborhood on the other side of the city. She disembarked and walked to a small, anonymous hotel where a room had been booked for her under a third name, with a forged passport to match. She was not to leave the room for 48 hours. Her extraction was already in motion. A team from the Mossad's Naval Commando Unit, Hyacinth 13, was en route aboard a merchant vessel that was scheduled to dock at the port of Piraeus in 2 days. She would be smuggled aboard as a member of the crew and would leave Greek territorial waters without ever passing through an official point of departure. Inside the hotel room, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound and hollow exhaustion. She had followed her training perfectly. The operation, from her perspective, was complete. The psychological cost, however, was only just beginning to be tallied. The immediate aftermath of the operation unfolded exactly as the planners had predicted. Approximately 90 seconds after Aviva administered the injection, Hamid al-Jabari was seen to stiffen in his chair, his hand clutching his chest as a massive coronary event overwhelmed his system. He collapsed onto the table, scattering his coffee cup and newspaper. The cafe was thrown into chaos. An ambulance was called, but by the time paramedics arrived, he was already dead. The Greek authorities conducted a routine investigation. The initial examination by the coroner on the scene noted the classic signs of a myocardial infarction. Given the victim's age and the public nature of his death, no foul play was suspected. A cursory autopsy was performed the next day, which confirmed the cause of death as a heart attack. The sophisticated, rapidly metabolizing agent left no trace, and the minuscule puncture wound on his back went entirely unnoticed. His death was officially recorded as being from natural causes. The long-term strategic value of Operation Hyacinth was immense and became apparent over the subsequent months. Without al-Jabari's logistical genius, the PFLP-GC's European network fell into disarray. Planned operations were aborted as funding dried up and communication channels went silent. The network's operatives, now cut off from their central command and control node, became isolated and vulnerable, with several cells being rolled up by European security services in the following year. The assassination had not just removed a man, it had effectively lobotomized a major terrorist organization's European presence for nearly a decade. The political and diplomatic repercussions were non-existent, precisely because the operation had been so perfectly deniable. There were no bullets, No bombs, no witnesses to a crime. Only a middle-aged man who had the misfortune of his heart giving out in a public place. For Aviva, the consequences were entirely internal. She was successfully extracted from Greece and returned to Israel, where she was debriefed and commended for her flawless execution of the mission. But the person who returned was not the same one who had left. She had lived a false life so completely that the boundaries between Aviva and Katarina had blurred. The clinical, detached act of taking a human life, even one deemed necessary, had left an indelible mark on her psyche. The mission had transformed her from a soldier into an instrument, and the psychological cost of that transformation was a silent, private burden she would carry for the rest of her life, a permanent ghost in the machine. The operation was a textbook success, a testament to the power of meticulous planning and deep-cover tradecraft, but it also served as a stark illustration of the profound and lasting human price of such victories. Was the clinical execution of a single, unarmed man in a public cafe a justifiable act of national defense, or was it a state-sanctioned murder that violated the very principles it claimed to protect? Can an intelligence service ever truly operate morally when its success is measured by its capacity for deception and lethal precision? Share your thoughts below.